Okay, we're running a wee bit late, but we've got time for our Q&A session. Just before we go into that, if I can just summarise up in a couple of slides what you've heard today before I invite the panel up. We feel that in the work that we've done in this study around Tie Back the Future, it's kind of shown that the technology is kicking about. And to go down this route isn't like going to the moon. It's something that would have a roadmap of 3 to 5 years. We think it would provide half the cost of subsea facilities and half the time between AFP and first oil, potentially making things economic that were uneconomic. We think there's a really good environmental reason to go down this route, and also a good cross-industry reason in the fact that we're going down a clear seabed policy there. So I'm just laughing with a yawn that went on there. So we think if we're looking at a circular economy model, I'm just saying here this roadmap could actually attract in some good funding potential, not just from the OGTC, but from a lot of other bodies out there that aren't industry specific. So it's just a point to note that I think you'd get quite a lot of support to go down this route. We made a first stab at what a roadmap might look like over the next 3 to 5 years. I think maybe some of the biggest busts you might have heard of technology-wise is maybe in the recovery of pipelines and the coating, and then also about getting the industry together to align itself to handle refurbishing and the volume of kit that might come on shore. And on that note, if we did go down this route, we had a sort of steering committee to make sure that all the different ideas and the technology paths were integrated to deliver it. We would need a committee, maybe with these kind of members on board. But I think from what you've heard certainly from Eric and Steve, is that it's not a technology challenge. This sometimes, we feel the technology is there. It just needs to be applied in a different way. But it's quite an industry challenge to get folk aligned to deliver this kind of model. So I think there would be certainly a requirement to have a steering group together with the people with the right position in the industry and the right caliber to help move us in this direction. And that might include people that I've just highlighted in this slide here. Cool. We'll go into the panel now. I just want to say we're really keen to hear from you if you've sat through this session. I think, Chris, you put up info at the OGTC. You can also contact us through this place on our website, if that would be of interest. If you think it's good, let us know. If you can help out, let us know. If you think it's a load of rubbish, let us know and maybe explain why. That would be sweet. Cool. So let's go into some Q&A for 20 minutes, and then we'll grab some lunch. If these lads could swing up to the top table, then we'll start taking some questions. In your own time, lads. I think we've got a few mics going about if anybody's interested in starting the questions. Oh, we've got one down at the front here. Cool.
What I'd like to know is whether we've got to sort of invent a new wheel here, or there's the opportunity to sponge off what they've been doing in other parts of the world around these economies. Is there any experience in any other parts of the world in these sort of reuse of technology?
In the oil and gas industry,
yeah.
Anybody like to step forward, Eric? I think you have to press a button, mate, yeah.
One of the examples that we uncovered was we spoke to some people about Petrobras's practices in their deeper waters, and I talked about the aspiration of trying to avoid bringing equipment onshore between developments. And something that we noted that Petrobras do is they do a lot of wet storage of equipment. So they buy equipment and install it in the seabed in a single campaign. And we think that there's maybe room for that in the North Sea. So that's one example. I don't know if any other guys can think of others.
No, I was just going to ask Scott there if he's got anything to say. And I know that within Zero Waste Scotland, the oil and gas industry is a key industry that they're focusing on. So, yeah, Scott, you got any comment?
I guess I wouldn't presume to lecture to a room of oil and gas experts about a field that I'm only partially sitting across, but there are certainly examples from the construction industry, more widely manufacturing in terms of its similar heavy industry, looking at life extension, looking at power by the hour if you've got the old example of Rolls-Royce, similar with gas turbines on platforms, and also for construction in terms of they are starting to look now at I guess within their own supply chains, but also across industry. There are perfectly good components there that they could use it if they have the planning and I guess the scope between different organisations to have that conversation. So it is early days, especially at large scale, but I think the conversations happening today are certainly going in the right direction for that.
I think there's another one just down by the aisle.
Tammy Sabir, Premier. I've got a question for Kevin. So you showed us all that lovely economics about how operators can make lots of money and good returns. What about the leasing companies? What's the value proposition for them? Because obviously they've got to stump up a lot of cash at the front, and what kind of margins are they getting?
Yeah, so the assumptions we use for the leasing model, and albeit a very simple one to come up with something we could just use as a straw man, had an upfront investment of 30 million in the reusable capital equipment, and then an assumption that they could lease that for, let's say, a 20-year period. That 20-year period allowed them somewhere in the region of a 20% rate of return on that investment, and allowed payback of their capital investment within 6 years. The reason for the 6 year being that that's the 6 year period of a single development, so even if subsequent developments didn't happen, they would at least have covered their capital cost within that one development, and they've still got a piece of kit left on their books that they can theoretically sell or reuse. So 20% rate of return is the base assumption, but also with a repayment period of 6 years.
Cool. Is that good? Yeah, we've got one down here, yeah.
An observation that rolls into a question. Everything that we've been looking at is reliant on what is becoming an endangered species, which is fixed platforms. There's so many of them being decommissioned. How many of the small pools are actually going to be within 10 kilometres of a fixed platform in 5 years' time?
Maybe no many. Maybe we need some new platforms. So stick around this afternoon and we'll find out what new standalone ones might come about. Sorry? Well, there was a slide that I put up earlier on here that there is a lot, yeah, that's in this slide pack here. There's 104 in the 30th licensing round that are within 25 kilometres. Yeah. Oh, sorry, sir.
Just on reuse, to go into reuse, have we not been using the wrong material? Because steel, by its very nature, has used its elastic limit for pipelines and risers, or have used a lot of it in the first installation. If you pull it, should we not need to be looking more at composites or other alternative materials?
We assume that it's feasible to reuse reeled pipe, but of course there is a plastic strain cycle, as you point out. Most for reeling projects, most of the pipes are put through a qualification sort of bending rig, and they do bend the pipe multiple times. I think 5 cycles, I believe, typically. So we took that to mean that it would actually be feasible from from an acceptability perspective to use reeled pipe, but we think it's actually be a lot more straightforward to use mechanical connectors. First of all, obviously the pipe's not plastically strained, but secondly, you're dealing with units of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pipe joints rather than 1 kilometre or welded up pipe joints. So I guess my thought on your question is, first of all, the plastic strain issue goes away from installation perspective if you don't reel. But secondly, I think I mentioned that composite pipe is absolutely ideal for reuse. I've never been involved in a project which has used composite pipe. I think these guys have been around for a while. The industry is, of course, slow taking on new technology. I think especially in pipelines. But it does feel as if there's a growing momentum towards using this sort of products. So, yeah, I agree.
I've worked at a university. I've become aware that in other industries, composites are becoming the norm, and we seem, for some reason, to be reluctant to use it. I don't understand why.
Yeah, well, I came into this industry, as I was saying, a long time ago, and before that I worked in a boatyard building GRP boats. I was amazed how little GRP there was. And really, in my experience, in the last 20 years, GRP protection frames, which hopefully we won't need anymore because of the agreement with the fishermen, is really the only place that composites are used subsea. But as you say, in other industries it's widely used, so there must be an opportunity there.
Yeah, I guess a great shout. Yeah, Charlie, there's another question just down by the aisle.
Hi, Paul Lindup from First Subsurface. If the panel was in charge of awarding the 30th round licenses, how would you reward a commitment by an applicant to entering a tie back of the future infrastructure reuse plan?
I'm not sure we've got an adult strong enough to answer that question in here. Thanks for stepping in there, Neil. You're glad to know Neil's facilitating this afternoon, so aye, all right, cool. Oh yeah, there's a couple of questions at the back there. Oh no.
Yeah, could we just ask what the design's all about the 80-20 principle and catch most. So what does the 80% look like? Because my fear, I guess, is that the 80% that's left has actually they're left because they're problem childs. They're not just small. So, for instance, I think something like 60-odd% is heavy oil. So, what does define 80%? What are the parameters that this looks like, please?
Yeah, I'll maybe talk to that first, for sure, Gordon. And I think you're right. I think the issue we've got at the OGTC is we don't have that data, and we don't know the volumes that other people know. It would be great if we could get our hands on that stuff. But and I think you've got a real valid point there. When we've talked about normal pressure, normal temperature in this study, I'm sure one of the panel can advise me on what the envelope was that we looked at. Gordon. Scott, where are you? Here we are.
We sort of looked at the 5K design pressure, so the 345 bar, and we looked at a 90-degree temperature for the production and 60-degree for the gas lift. Yeah,
I think that sounded about right. It was a 5K system with just under 100-degree kind of design pressure. But I think it's a really valid point that Gordon makes. Yeah, I've got another question, just maybe for Scott. I'd be keen to hear from you. You don't work in the oil and gas industry, Scott, so just What's the view from Zero Waste Scotland on the oil and gas industry and how we go about our business? What do you reckon, mate?
I feel that's a very loaded question, but to attempt to dodge the bullet, I'd say, at least from my general experience talking with folks in Aberdeen and more widely operating the oil and gas system, everyone gives themselves quite a rough ride about, industry is resistant to change, and we've always done it this way, and it'll never change. And it's from my experience, it's the same across other major technology sectors, heavy industry, and it's nothing that the experience and essentially the drive of people such as today can't overcome. I think there is opportunity there, and people are seeing ways to generate that value, or at least deal with the low oil prices and at the same time those small pools. So it's nothing that can't be overcome, as has been shown today.
Yes, a good question at the aisle.
Yes, it's actually just following on the comment you just made in terms of resistance to change in the oil industry, and the analogy we'll be looking at, like the green sector, and how the government has provided support to encourage the industry to take the step forward. And I think building on the last question about the perspective from the lease companies in this scenario, it would have been interesting to see the perspective of the government as well from the take, because the companies are making money, suggests that the government will bring in taxes. So do we potentially see a scenario where the government or regulatory authorities could provide seed capital to allow this industry to take off? Because we know once you can demonstrate success, then other financing, typical financing channels would follow suit. So it's really a question directed at Kevin, I think. Yeah.
Or I can certainly, I just wondered if, I know Eric would have some thoughts on there. My thoughts on there is that it probably would require some funding to kickstart it. I think it would actually require a change in a kind of fundamental change in the supply chain model, and maybe a new tier or a different level to come in, and for that to happen requires some support, I think.
I'm actually talking on the operator side, actually, because in the end they're the ones that decide to go ahead with these projects, and most of the time the bigger companies, if it's unproven, untested technology, they might be less willing to do it. But the smaller companies or new startups who have ideas and willing to take risks, but normally the big constraint is access to capital. So it's not even the technology provider side, it's the companies, small operators or upcoming upstarts that are willing to take the risk but don't have access to capital. So
just to, it's not quite the answer to the same question, so apologies if I'm answering a different question than the one you asked, but I think one of the solutions that we put forward was the leasing model, where perhaps the companies taking the technical risk of being willing to reuse equipment is separated from the company who perhaps owns and leases them that equipment. So whilst it's not answering the question completely, by separating some of the capital risk from the risk of reuse, so the technical risk is separate from the capital risk, you mitigate that slightly, so the smaller companies willing to take that technical risk are sheltered slightly from the capital risk. Now that's not the same thing as having an allowance from the government or a tax incentive, but it does perhaps slightly assist with that problem.
Cool.
On that,
here we go.
Is there? So on that, is there precedent elsewhere in the industry or other industries for lease providers to take that kind of risk? I'm sort of putting myself in the position of saying, who wants to own a subsea tree that's 6 years old and you've got your money back? I'm just sort of saying, who are those investors? Where are they going to come from?
Yeah, I mean, I think the rest of the panel probably have a view on this as well. I mean, there's certainly a a justifiable return. Now, whether there's appetite for that in the oil industry, I don't know, but if you look at things like subsea warehouses, and rather than taking ownership of an old piece of kit, building it from new with perhaps redundant capacity that you've got in your own facilities, if you're a larger service company, there may be an argument for that. Now, there's currently, not that I'm aware, unless anyone can correct me, a current precedent for that in the oil and gas industry, but certainly lease models like that are present elsewhere in industry, and you know, we could possibly learn from that. And if a large enough service company was willing to take that route, then it might be a way forward.
So you don't think it's the financial sector, you think it's somewhere else in the supply chain using their balance sheet to take E&P company capital risk?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there would be a return for whatever company wished to make that investment in the capital by having a market for that lease. Now, there are all kinds of conversation around the commercial structure of that and the viability of that, but certainly the concept of having a subsea warehouse and separating ownership of reusable kit from those who need to reuse that kit is a viable commercial structure. Whether it's one that people will adopt is another question.
I am looking. Yeah, another question here.
We've got drilling. We lease drilling rigs, we lease logging equipment, we lease all sorts of stuff. It's just completely normal. We're just not doing it for some of the other stuff.
Yeah, totally agree. Hey guys, it's past now, so I was just going to suggest we take one more question right on, and then we'll call it a wrap.
Good afternoon, Raymond Hall, SFF. Primary concern for the fishermen is safety at sea, and anything that's laid subsea is a snagging hazard. The next big issue we will have with this concept is the vast loss of access for fishing areas. With pipelines laid, surface laid pipelines that we can't cross, it's going to close off a lot of area of fishing. I would just like to ask Stephen about the pipeline. You mentioned the pipeline's going to snake on the bottom. How much of a snake are you speaking about? 10 metres, 20 metres, 50 metres? Could you answer that, please?
A typical obviously depends on a number of factors, but typical lateral buckle might be 200 metres long, and it might deflect at 10 or 20 metres either side of the centre line.
Okay, so my question would be, if we had coordinates of this pipeline that the fishermen had on their charts, how are they going to know when this pipe is deflected? And it could be very easily picked up.
Once the pipe has gone into has formed a shape, then the buckles move as you put the operational load on and take the operational load off, but they don't usually change entirely. They won't disappear and pop up somewhere else. Once it's formed a deflected shape, it will stay in pretty much that deflected shape. So once you're in operation and you have coordinates, the actual change in shape is just a few meters. So you can tell me, because you'll know much better than I do, the way that boats operate. But within the confines of the sea, I would have thought within a few meters is probably as good as you'd want to know.
Yeah, a few meters is fine. It's just with these pipelines being surface laid, they're going to cut off an immense amount of the sea, and as we saw in the first hour this morning, 6 times the size of Wales we're looking at. I'm not saying it's all going to happen at one time, but the fishing industry has went through the last 15 years what the oil industry is going through at this moment, and we've just got back to where we want to be. With it's well documented on national TV, stocks are back where we want them to be. We don't want to have areas of the North Sea shut down for the fishermen.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair comment, Raymond, and it's why we're engaging in the discussion, and it's why I've been in to see Stephen and Bertie quite a bit at the SFF and the lads down at the NFFO. So by no means are we standing here saying that this is how it's going to look in the future, but I think we're certainly saying it's a discussion that we need to have to see if we can come up with some form of agreement, some form of way of working that helps both industries.
Yeah, absolutely, Graham. I'm not putting up barriers. This is a new technology. I see where it's coming from your side, but there has to be a lot of interaction with the fishermen going ahead with this.
Totally agree. Yeah, well said. Okay, great. Hey, let's for sure let's call it a wrap now. I'd just like to say thanks very much to all the speakers for the time they've given in the prep for this.